Okay people, welcome to our Space for Science, and this is Sam. And today we're talking about one of the pillars of science, the scientific method. The scientific method is something everybody seems to know, but actually not everyone quite does. But it's really important in life, it's a way to give us a structure, to give us certainty about information we read, information we know and we seek. And our objective for today's class is to identify the steps of the scientific method and to see them applied into a simple problem, alright? So let's begin. So what is it? What is a scientific method? The scientific method is a series of natural steps. They're pretty natural, it means they're obvious, they are logical. So it's not something you have to memorize, because it comes quite naturally. So it's this series of steps that leads us into answering a complicated answer or solving a problem. It doesn't really have to be complicated. You can use a scientific method for big scientific things, but also for small matters, small problems of everyday life. Let's start with step number one. And step number one is having a question or a problem that you want to solve, something that really matters to you. Well, here's an example. Imagine that your girlfriend or your boyfriend gave you a plant. Okay, I have an example here. My girlfriend gave me this beautiful plant last week. It's been with me for 5 weeks. It's tiny, you see. Seems like I haven't been taking care of it because it's withering, the poor little plant. And I might ask you, what do you think the problem is? And your most likely answer is, you're not giving it water. Because we know that water is something plants need to exist. Okay? Many times people try to solve problems jumping into conclusions. You see something, you remember what you know from before, and you immediately offer a solution. But it's not quite like this, If you really want to come up with better solutions, you have to make observations. And that is my step number 2. I have a problem, number 1. Number 2, I make observations. An observation is not about watching. It's about watching, smelling, touching, using all of your 5 senses involved, yeah? Okay, so I'm gonna touch the plant. And guess what? It's all mushy. It's squishy, it's wet. So the problem is not lack of water. The problem, apparently, is excess of water. Okay, that is one observation. Now, along with observations, also come basic knowledge, previous knowledge that I have, or that I could find about this. So, in this second step, we also do research. We call this background research. And find information done by others about the same topic. But in this such simple thing, the idea will be to simply remember how much water is this plant getting. And it turns out I have been watering this plant daily for the last 5 days, 5 weeks. Sorry, 5 days, sorry. For the last week. And it hasn't been good. The plant is not looking good. That's my observation, okay? Touching the plant, knowing something about the plant. Okay? Let's go to step number. Well guys, so we've come to step number 3. If I have already a problem and a question, and I've made my observations and done some research perhaps, now I can come up with a guess, yes? A prediction, something or somewhat of an idea of what I think the solution to the problem will be. And this is called the hypothesis. It's a pretty weird name, yeah? But it's not just a name, it means educated guess, okay? A hypothesis, as I've said before, is a prediction of a solution of a problem. And it's always written as if it were a conditional statement. It actually is a conditional statement. I did my observations and remember the plant was squishy. It had too much water. So my hypothesis is going to be something like, if I water the plant 3 times a week, it'll get better. Alright? That's my hypothesis. Why 3 times a week? Why not 2? Why not just 1? I really can't tell, but I know that I gotta reduce the amount of water. I'm gonna choose these and see if I get lucky. Good, so we have our problem in question, we've done our observation, and then we came up with a hypothesis, which was, if I reduce the amount of water, if I water my plant just 3 times a week, it's gonna get better, alright? Well, what comes next is to prove that hypothesis, to prove it right or to prove it wrong. In order to do that, we have to run an experiment. People love experiments, yes? Well, experiments have to follow a certain rule, a certain set of rules, you know, so we're gonna see that, we're gonna talk about it, yes? First of all, remember that all of this time we've been talking about water and about daily or 3 times a week, but we haven't talked about the sun, we haven't talked about disease, we haven't talked about maybe an animal that could hurt the plant, or even the quantity of water, you know? All of those things that could affect the growth of my plant are called variables. And variables are something that I have to be very careful about, because in an experiment, there's no way you can work with 2 or 3 or 4 variables at the same time. You have to always stay focused on one. We have to be as specific as possible in order to get reliable results when we come up with results, okay? And in order to do that, we isolate variables, alright? We're going to have a bunch of variables that are controlled, and we're going to have one variable that is going to be manipulated and changed, okay? And that variable is going to be time, alright? So, all of the plants in the experiments, because yes, I said plants, okay? Pay attention. I could just stop watering my plant daily and start watering it 3 times a week and probably see it get better. That would be amazing, my girlfriend would be happy with me. But that would be too easy. Just too easy. That's not how science works. You have to be very specific, and you want to find the best possible way to have this plant in the best possible conditions. Okay? So we're going to do it the hard way here, and we're going to get several experimental groups. Experimental groups are all the subjects on which you are going to run the experiment. So we're going to go to the market and we're going to get 3 more plants, alright? So we're going to have 4 plants. We're going to call them plant 1, plant 2, plant 3, and the original plant, which is going to be called the control group. I will explain to you in a moment what that is, okay? And I was saying, all of these plants are going to be under certain variables. I have to be careful and try to maintain all the variables the same for all the plants, okay? The same amount of water, yes. The same amount of sunlight, yes. Space, yes. All of them outside or all of them inside, yes. But what's gonna change is how often I water, okay? Because that's what the experiment is about. So I'm gonna give each plant 1 glass of water, but for the experimental groups, let's say plant number 1 is gonna get the water 3 times a week, which is my hypothesis, remember? Plant number 2 is gonna get watered 2 times a week. Plant number 3 is gonna get watered only once a week. And the control group, the original plant, will continue to be watered daily. And you may say, hey, but that's just cruel, you know, that she's dying, you're going to continue watering it daily. Well, yes, because a control group is a standard of comparison, okay? What does this mean? Listen carefully. What if I continue to water these plants daily for 1, 2 months, and in 3 months, the plant survives and it turns out to be even more beautiful than before? Wouldn't it be weird? wouldn't you feel like you've been cheated? Like, hey, all of this time I kept watering it and first it was dying and now it's not. Then the problem was not the water, alright? The problem was probably that the room was too cold, or that there wasn't enough sun, or the season of the year, and you didn't know it, and you were about to deprive this poor plant of water, of her daily dosage of water, for nothing, okay? So we have to maintain it under the same regime, a glass a day, so that in a month, if it continues to be dying, you can be 100% sure that your hypothesis was right and that it was excess water that was killing it, okay? So, I'm gonna use this to compare with this and see which one grows better. That is my experiment. I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna talk about one example that helps people understand what the control group is. Imagine the Olympics. Imagine the power runners, okay? 100 meters, people who run really fast, and we have 10 power runners on 10 lanes, and on the 11th lane, I enter the race. What do you think is going to happen? Am I going to win? Not only am I going to lose, I'm going to be ridiculized, you know, I'm going to bite the dust totally. And this is going to serve a purpose. When people in the crowd look at the power runners running next to me and passing next to me and running 3 laps in the time I run just 1, they're going to be able to experience, to appreciate how powerful they are. They look more powerful if they are next to an individual who is just a commoner like myself, you know. It's the same in this case. If I have my control group, I can better appreciate the results on the experimental groups, okay? So, variables, things that affect the experiment. Experimental group, subjects that are going to be experimented on. Control group, standard for comparison that is left in the same conditions during the whole experiment, okay? Good, so let's move on to our next step. Okay, so look at this beautiful model of our experiment, alright? We have our control group who have been watered daily, and look at the poor conditions it is in. It's still dying. We've run this experiment for 1 month, and now it's time to take a look at the results. That is our 5th step. Yeah? Our 5th step is to gather results of my experiment and to analyze them, so I can get solutions to my problems, okay? Good. So as I was saying, thanks to the fact that my control group is dying, which is kind of cruel, I know that my hypothesis regarding the excess of water was probably right. But now, let's see about the rest of it. Remember, we said 3 times a week. So, the example, the plant, the experimental group that was being watered once a week. Look at it. It's got some green there, definitely, but the one that is being brought up the best is the one that gets water 3 times a week, and that is amazing. This is just as we had predicted, okay? So we can now reach conclusions. Next step. Okay, so we've come to some data, and by watching the data, we've turned out lucky, and we've seen that our hypothesis was right. Watering this plant 3 times a week is better than watering it daily, because the plant now looks better, yes? But it doesn't always happen like this. Science doesn't always have happy endings. Actually, most of the time there are mistakes and revisions and things that have to be done and fixed, okay? So we need to go to number 6, which is coming up with strong conclusions, okay? The conclusions can have 2 phases, basically. Sometimes the experiment doesn't turn out well, and we have to reject our hypothesis. The hypothesis was probably wrong, or maybe not the hypothesis, but you have to go back to the previous steps and see where was the problem. Maybe your observations weren't accurate and you weren't paying attention to something, then you have to observe again. Or maybe your hypothesis was not well formulated and you have to do adjustments to it, and if you adjust the hypothesis, you will probably have to adjust the experiment too. Or maybe the hypothesis was good, but you weren't paying attention or weren't careful enough while doing the experiment. You fell asleep one day and you didn't water your plants, or you just forgot about it, or you went on vacation and you didn't follow through the experiment for 1 month, doing the watering at the proper time, you know? All of those problems could affect the results, and if the hypothesis is rejected, if the experiment doesn't produce the expected results, you have to go back and redo things. On the other hand, if your experiment is successful, you accept the hypothesis, and then you run into the 7th step. And what is our final step? Simple. If you have the right results, share them. The 7th step is to report your findings. This is why scientists publish papers. Those papers are going to work for other scientists when they work on the same or in similar subjects. That's how medicine moves through, astronomy moves through, all science moves through, by reporting and sharing what you now know. And those have been the 7 steps of the scientific method. I very much appreciate your attention, and this has been Sam. I hope you learn a lot, and like and subscribe, don't forget to share. Thank you very much.